Grace Mitchell had exactly 12 minutes to transform from a frazzled mess into a picture-perfect bridesmaid. And right now, those 12 minutes were slipping through her fingers like sand. She sprinted through the Grand Hotel's marble corridors, her emerald dress bunched in her fists, her carefully styled hair already coming undone. Today was supposed to be simple. Show up early, help her best friend Sophie get ready, and fulfill her duties as maid of honor. Instead, here she was, catastrophically late because her neighbor's cat had somehow locked itself in her car. The hotel was massive, all gold fixtures and crystal chandeliers, the kind of place where people spoke in hushed, important tones. Grace felt completely out of place as she dodged between elegantly dressed guests, mumbling apologies with every near collision. The ballroom was just ahead. She could hear the string quartet beginning to play, which meant the ceremony was about to start. She rounded the final corner at full speed, her heels clicking frantically against the polished floor. That was when disaster struck. Grace slammed into something solid and warm, and suddenly she was airborne. Her bouquet flew in one direction, her clutch in another, and she braced herself for the humiliating impact with the floor, but it never came. Strong hands caught her waist, steadying her with surprising gentleness. The scent of cedar and something expensive filled her senses. Grace found herself staring at a crisp white shirt, and as her gaze traveled upward, she forgot how to breathe. The man holding her was stunning in a way that seemed almost unfair. Sharp jawline, perfectly styled dark hair with just a hint of silver at the temples, and eyes the color of storm clouds. He looked like he belonged in a magazine spread about successful, untouchable men. "You might want to slow down before you hurt someone," he said, his voice deep and carrying a hint of amusement. Grace felt her face burn. She tried to step back, but her heel caught on her dress hem. Before she could face plant for real, the stranger moved again, this time freeing the fabric with practiced ease. "Thank you," she managed, gathering her scattered belongings. "I am so sorry." "I am very late, I noticed," he replied, and was that a smile playing at the corner of his mouth? "The wedding party is just through those doors. You should probably hurry." Grace nodded and rushed past him, but not before catching one last glimpse of those gray eyes watching her with undisguised interest. She pushed through the ballroom doors and slipped into her place among the bridesmaids just as the processional music began. Sophie shot her a look that promised a lengthy conversation later, but Grace could only focus on catching her breath. The ceremony was beautiful. Sophie glowed with happiness, her groom looked appropriately nervous and smitten, and Grace tried very hard to pay attention. Except her eyes kept drifting to the groomsman's side where that man from the hallway stood. He was apparently part of the wedding party, which meant she would have to face him again. "Wonderful. Who is that?" Grace whispered to the bridesmaid next to her. "A bubbly woman named Nicole." "Julian Montgomery," Nicole whispered back, eyes wide. "You do not know him? He is only one of the richest investment bankers in the country, worth billions. Sophie's husband works at his firm." Grace's stomach dropped. Of course. Of course, the man she had nearly tackled was a billionaire. Because her life could not just be normally awkward, it had to be spectacularly, memorably awkward. The ceremony ended and guests moved to the reception area. Grace tried to make herself useful, checking on Sophie, adjusting decorations, anything to avoid another encounter with Julian Montgomery. "But the universe had other plans. Running away from me already?" That voice, smooth and knowing, came from right behind her. Grace turned to find Julian standing there, hands in his pockets, looking far too comfortable for someone who should be mingling with important people. "I am not running. I am working. Is that what you call hiding behind flower arrangements?" She crossed her arms. "I was fixing them. They were crooked. They were perfect." His smile was slow, deliberate. "You are Grace Mitchell, right? Sophie mentioned you. Said you are an architect?" Despite herself, Grace felt a small thrill that he had asked about her. "Yes. I design commercial buildings. Nothing as glamorous as whatever you do. I move money around and make rich people richer," Julian said with surprising honesty. "Trust me, your job is far more interesting." They stood there for a moment and Grace realized she was staring. She cleared her throat. Well, I should get back to my duties, or you could have a drink with me. Grace blinked. What? One drink? At the bar. Unless you are afraid. That was clearly bait, and Grace knew it. But something in his expression, that mix of confidence and genuine interest, made her hesitate. She glanced around the ballroom. Sophie was happily occupied with her new husband. The other bridesmaids were chatting with guests. One drink would not hurt. Fine. But I choose what we drink. Deal. They made their way to the elegant bar tucked in the corner of the ballroom. Grace ordered 2 glasses of whiskey, neat, and enjoyed the flicker of surprise that crossed Julian's face. Impressive choice. Did you think I would order something with an umbrella in it? Maybe, he admitted, accepting his glass. Tell me, Grace Mitchell, how does someone who crashes into billionaires in hotel hallways end up designing buildings? Grace laughed despite herself. Well, it started when I realized I was really bad at arriving places on time, but really good at imagining how spaces could look. They talked, and Grace found herself relaxing. Julian was surprisingly easy to talk to, asking questions that showed genuine interest rather than polite small talk. He told her about growing up in New York, about how he had built his investment firm from nothing, about his love for old architecture. You should see some of the buildings in Prague, he said, his eyes lighting up. The Gothic structures there are incredible. I have always wanted to visit Europe, Grace admitted. But between projects and deadlines, travel keeps getting pushed back. You should make time. Life is too short to put off the things that matter. There was something in the way he said it, something weighted with experience that made Grace study him more closely. Beneath the polished exterior, she sensed someone who understood sacrifice and regret. The evening drifted on, and eventually Julian asked her to dance. Grace hesitated, but when he extended his hand, she took it. On the dance floor, with his hand on her waist and her hand in his, the rest of the world seemed to fade. They moved together easily, naturally, as if they had done this 100 times before. You are full of surprises, Julian murmured near her ear. Good surprises or bad surprises? The best kind. When the song ended, Grace reluctantly stepped back. She needed air, needed space to think. This whole evening felt surreal. Julian Montgomery was not someone who should be interested in her. They lived in different worlds. As the reception wound down, Grace found herself outside, trying to call for a ride. Every service showed long wait times. She sighed, resigning herself to a lengthy wait, when a familiar voice spoke behind her. Need a ride? Grace turned to find Julian, jacket slung over his shoulder, looking completely at ease. I can wait for a car. You could. Or you could let me drive you home. It is late, and I promise I am a decent driver. Every logical part of Grace's brain screamed that this was a bad idea. But she was tired, her feet hurt, and something about Julian made her want to throw caution to the wind. All right. But only because I do not want to wait another hour. His smile was victorious. Fair enough. They walked to his car, a sleek black vehicle that probably cost more than Grace made in 2 years. The ride started in comfortable silence, city lights sliding past the windows. But eventually, Julian spoke. I am glad you crashed into me today. Grace looked at him surprised. Really, why? Because... He glanced at her briefly before returning his attention to the road. You are interesting, and I do not meet interesting people very often. Grace felt her heart do something complicated in her chest. She did not know what to say to that, so she said nothing. When they arrived at her apartment building, she thanked him and moved to leave, but Julian gently caught her hand. Can I see you again? Not at a wedding. Just us. Grace knew she should say no. This could only lead to complications. But when she looked into those storm-gray eyes, she found herself nodding. Yes, I would like that. His smile was worth every bit of risk. Monday morning arrived with the subtle cruelty of reality crashing back into place. Grace walked into the offices of Henderson Architecture with her usual coffee in hand, her mind still replaying moments from the weekend. The way Julian had looked at her, the warmth of his hand, the promise of seeing each other again. She had spent all of Sunday convincing herself it was just a fleeting moment, a beautiful anomaly that would fade back into normal life. The morning meeting was scheduled for 9 o'clock sharp. Grace gathered her portfolio of designs for the Riverside Commercial Complex, the firm's most significant project in years. This was her baby. She had poured 6 months of late nights and countless revisions into creating something truly special. Today, they would finally meet the lead investor who had made it all possible. Grace entered the conference room, nodding to her colleagues already seated around the polished table. Thomas Henderson, the firm's founder, stood at the head reviewing documents. Rachel Kim, the senior project manager, was organizing presentation materials. Everything felt routine and professional. Then the door opened, and Grace's world tilted sideways. Julian Montgomery walked in, looking every bit the powerful businessman in his tailored navy suit. His expression was composed, professional, giving nothing away. But when his eyes met hers, Grace saw the flicker of surprise quickly masked by something else. Recognition, interest, maybe even pleasure. "Good morning, everyone," Thomas began, oblivious to the silent storm happening across the table. "I would like to introduce Julian Montgomery, principal investor and strategic partner for the Riverside project. His firm has committed substantial resources to making this vision a reality." Grace felt the room tilt. This could not be happening. The man she had danced with, the man who had driven her home and asked to see her again, was now her boss. Well, not technically her boss, but close enough to make everything impossibly complicated. "Mr. Montgomery, this is our team," Thomas continued, gesturing around the table. "And this is Grace Mitchell, lead architect on the project. Her designs are what sold us on the concept initially." Julian extended his hand across the table, his expression perfectly neutral. "Miss Mitchell, I look forward to working with you." His hand was warm, his grip firm but brief. Grace managed to return the handshake without betraying the chaos in her chest. "Likewise, Mr. Montgomery." The meeting proceeded with painful normalcy. Julian asked intelligent questions about structural integrity, budget projections, and timeline expectations. Grace presented her designs, walking him through each element with practiced professionalism. But beneath the surface, she felt his attention on her in ways that had nothing to do with architecture. When she explained her vision for the building's facade, incorporating natural light and green spaces, Julian leaned forward slightly. "Interesting approach. What inspired this direction?" Grace met his eyes, choosing her words carefully. "I believe buildings should enhance human experience, not just serve functional purposes. People spend most of their lives inside structures. Those spaces should make them feel alive, not trapped." Something shifted in Julian's expression. "Beautifully said." The meeting concluded with plans for weekly updates and site visits. As everyone filed out, Grace tried to slip away quickly, but Julian's voice stopped her. "Miss Mitchell, do you have a moment?" Her colleagues glanced back curiously, but Grace nodded, waiting until the room cleared. The moment the door closed, the professional mask slipped slightly from Julian's face. "You did not mention you were an architect working on commercial projects. You did not mention you invest in architecture firms," Grace countered, crossing her arms. "Fair point." Julian moved closer, not inappropriately so, but enough that she caught his familiar scent. "This complicates things. That is an understatement." He studied her for a long moment. "Does it have to?" Grace felt her resolve wavering. "Julian, I worked incredibly hard to get where I am. This project could define my career. I cannot afford any complications that might make people question my professionalism or my designs." "I understand," he said quietly, "and I respect that. But Grace, what happened between us this weekend was real. I felt it. I think you did too." She wanted to deny it, but lying seemed pointless. "Yes, I felt it. But feeling something and acting on it are different things. We have to work together now. That has to come first." Julian nodded slowly, though disappointment flickered across his features. "All right, professional boundaries. I can do that." "Thank you. But Grace," he added as she turned to leave, "just because I can do something does not mean I like it." The following weeks tested Grace's resolve in ways she had not anticipated. Julian attended every meeting, asked thoughtful questions, and treated her with perfect professional courtesy. But there were moments when their eyes would meet across the conference table, and she would see everything he was not saying. The way he listened when she spoke, the slight smile when she made a clever point, the way his gaze lingered just a second too long. The project progressed well. Construction began on schedule, and Grace found herself spending more time on site, ensuring her vision translated properly into reality. Julian visited frequently, ostensibly to monitor his investment, but Grace suspected other motivations. One afternoon, she stood on the construction site, reviewing structural plans with the foreman. The afternoon sun beat down relentlessly, and she had long since abandoned her blazer for just a simple blouse and slacks. She was so focused on explaining a modification that she did not notice Julian's arrival until she heard his voice behind her. That is a significant change from the original plan. Grace turned, shielding her eyes from the sun. "Mr. Montgomery?" "Yes?" "We discovered the original foundation approach would not work with the soil composition. This solution actually improves stability while reducing costs." Julian studied the plans, then looked at the partially constructed framework. "Show me." For the next hour, Grace walked him through the site, explaining every decision and modification. Julian asked surprisingly technical questions, revealing a deeper understanding of construction than she had expected. When they finished, they stood at the edge of the site, looking at the skeleton of what would become something remarkable. "You really love this," Julian observed. "Is it that obvious? You light up when you talk about your work. It is impressive." Grace felt heat rise to her cheeks that had nothing to do with the sun. She changed the subject. "You seem to know quite a bit about construction for a finance person." "My father was a contractor," Julian admitted. "I grew up on job sites before I went into business. I still remember the smell of fresh lumber and concrete." "Why did you leave it?" He was quiet for a moment. "My father built beautiful things, but he died broke and exhausted. I wanted security, stability, so I chose money over sawdust." There was regret in his voice, old and deep. Grace found herself wanting to comfort him, but held back. "Do you ever miss it?" "Every day." They stood in comfortable silence, watching workers move across the site. It felt easy, natural, this moment between them. Too easy. "Grace," Julian started, then stopped himself. "Never mind. What? Nothing. Just remembering I am supposed to maintain professional boundaries." She smiled despite herself. "How is that working for you?" "Terribly," he admitted with a rueful laugh. "Absolutely terribly." Before Grace could respond, Rachel appeared from across the site, waving. "Grace, we need your approval on the window specifications." Duty called. Grace excused herself, but as she walked away, she felt Julian's gaze follow her. This was becoming unsustainable. That evening, Grace stayed late at the office, finalizing reports. She was alone, or so she thought, until she heard footsteps in the hallway. Julian appeared in her doorway, looking tired, but still put together in his rolled-up shirt sleeves. "I thought I was the only workaholic here," he said, just finishing up. "What are you doing here?" "Forgot some documents in the conference room." He leaned against the door frame. "Grace, we need to talk." Her heart rate picked up. "About what?" "About the fact that maintaining professional distance is making us both miserable." Julian stepped into her office, closing the door behind him. Grace stood, suddenly nervous in the quiet intimacy of the empty building. "What are you suggesting?" "I am suggesting that we are both adults. We can handle this situation with maturity and discretion. I am suggesting that I cannot stop thinking about you, and I do not want to try anymore." Grace felt her carefully constructed walls crumbling. "This is a bad idea." "Probably," Julian agreed, moving closer. "But some of the best things in life are bad ideas. My career will not suffer because of me. I would never let that happen." "Grace, I am not asking you to compromise your professionalism or your reputation. I am just asking for a chance. Dinner, conversation, getting to know each other outside these walls." She should say no. Every logical part of her brain screamed to maintain the boundaries they had established. But when Julian looked at her like that, like she was the most fascinating person in the world, logic seemed overrated. "One dinner," she finally said, "but we keep it separate from work." Completely separate. His smile was brilliant. "One dinner. I can work with that." That Saturday, Julian picked her up in casual clothes that somehow made him even more attractive. Instead of some fancy restaurant, he took her to a small Italian place tucked away in a neighborhood she had never explored. No pretense, he explained as they sat down. No power suits or business talk. Just us. The evening unfolded like a dream. They talked about everything except work. Julian told her about his childhood, about learning carpentry from his father, about his mother who had been a teacher. Grace shared stories about growing up with 3 brothers, about discovering architecture through building elaborate blanket forts as a child. I used to drive my mother crazy, Grace laughed. I would rearrange furniture constantly, trying to improve the flow of the house. Did it work? She caught me measuring the living room with a tape measure when I was 10 and told me I needed a hobby. So I joined the school's drama club instead, from architecture to acting. That is quite a pivot. I lasted 1 semester. Turns out I am terrible at memorizing lines. But the drama teacher's husband was an architect, and he let me shadow him for a project. That was it. I was hooked. Julian reached across the table, his fingers brushing hers. I am glad you found your calling. The touch sent electricity through her. Me too. They lingered over dessert, neither wanting the evening to end. When Julian finally drove her home, he walked her to her door like a gentleman from another era. Thank you for tonight, Grace said softly. I had a wonderful time, so did I. He hesitated, then added, Can I see you again? Outside of work? Yes, she heard herself say. I would really like that. Julian's smile was worth every complication this might bring. Over the next month, they fell into a careful rhythm. At work, they were consummate professionals, but outside the office, they explored the city together, discovered shared interests, and learned each other's stories. Grace found herself falling for Julian in ways that both thrilled and terrified her. Then came the crisis that changed everything. Grace was reviewing permits when Thomas called an emergency meeting. Julian was already there when she arrived, his expression grim. We have a problem, Thomas announced. The city council rejected our environmental impact assessment. They are threatening to halt construction entirely. Grace felt the blood drain from her face. This project was everything. How is that possible? We followed every regulation. Politics, Rachel said bitterly. There is a councilman who wants the land for a different development. He is using environmental concerns as leverage. The room erupted in worried discussion. Grace looked at Julian, who sat quietly, clearly calculating options. When the meeting ended with no clear solutions, everyone filed out dejected. Julian caught Grace's arm gently. Walk with me. They went to the construction site, now ominously quiet with work suspended. Grace stood staring at her unfinished vision, fighting back tears of frustration. This will kill the project, she said quietly. Everything I worked for. Not if I can help it, Julian replied. I have connections on the city council. I can make some calls, apply pressure where it matters. Grace turned to him. That could damage your reputation. Make you enemies, I do not care, he said simply. Your work deserves to exist. I will do whatever it takes. In that moment, Grace realized something profound. Julian was not just supporting a project. He was supporting her, believing in her vision enough to risk his own standing. That meant more than any grand gesture ever could. She stepped closer, her voice thick with emotion. Why are you doing this? Julian cupped her face gently. Because, Grace Mitchell, somewhere between that chaotic collision and right now, I fell completely in love with you. Her breath caught. Her heart hammered. And all those careful professional boundaries she had maintained crumbled entirely. I love you too, she whispered, when he kissed her there, surrounded by the framework of her dreams. Grace knew that some complications were worth every risk. The morning after Julian's confession brought a strange mixture of euphoria and anxiety. Grace woke up with her phone buzzing insistently on her nightstand. She reached for it groggily, her mind still replaying the moment Julian had kissed her at the construction site. The memory made her smile until she saw the string of messages from Rachel. Emergency meeting at 8. Council voted. Call me immediately! Grace's stomach dropped. She dialed Rachel's number, her hands trembling slightly as she waded through the rings. Grace, thank goodness, Rachel answered, her voice tight with stress. The city council met last night. Emergency session. They voted to permanently block our project unless we completely redesign to include affordable housing units. They want 50% of the building designated for low-income residents. Grace sat up straight, her architect brain already calculating. That would require completely reworking the entire design. Rachel, that changes everything. The structural load, the financing model, the timeline. I know. Thomas is furious. He wants to abandon the project entirely and sue the city for breach of contract. But Julian called an hour ago. He wants to meet before we make any decisions. The office felt like a pressure cooker when Grace arrived. Thomas paced near the windows, his face red with frustration. Rachel sat at the conference table, surrounded by papers and coffee cups. And Julian stood calmly reviewing documents, though Grace could see the tension in his shoulders. "This is absurd!" Thomas exploded as Grace entered. "We followed every rule, jumped through every hoop, and now they move the goalposts. I will not redesign an entire building because some politician wants to look good for voters." Julian looked up, his eyes meeting Grace's briefly before addressing Thomas. "What if we did not see this as an obstacle but as an opportunity?" Thomas stared at him incredulously. "An opportunity? Julian, they are trying to kill this project." "No," Julian said calmly, walking to the table where building plans lay spread out. "They are asking us to build something meaningful, something that actually serves the community instead of just generating profit." Grace felt something shift in the room. She moved closer to the plans, her mind already reimagining possibilities. Julian was right. This could be more than just another commercial building. It could be something that mattered. The financial model does not work, Thomas argued. Affordable housing units do not generate enough revenue to justify the construction costs. "What if we adjusted the model?" Grace said slowly, her architect instincts taking over. "What if we created a mixed-use design? Retail on the ground floor, affordable housing in the middle sections, and premium office space on the upper floors. The commercial rent could subsidize the residential units." Julian nodded, picking up her thread. "And my firm could restructure the investment terms, lower expected returns in exchange for tax incentives and long-term community goodwill. The project becomes profitable over 10 years instead of 5. Thomas looked between them, his anger slowly giving way to consideration. "You are both insane. Do you understand how much additional work this means? Complete redesign, new permits, renegotiated contracts? Yes," Grace said firmly. "And it is worth it." The room fell silent. Rachel looked thoughtful. Thomas rubbed his face with both hands. Julian watched Grace with something like pride in his eyes. "Fine," Thomas finally said. "But Grace, this is your project. If we do this, you lead the redesign. And Julian, I hope your connections are as good as you claim, because we will need every favor you have to make this work." Over the next 3 weeks, Grace practically lived at the office. She redesigned the entire building from the foundation up, creating something more complex and beautiful than her original vision. Julian worked alongside her many evenings, not as an investor, but as someone who understood construction and wanted to help. Those late nights became their stolen moments. Working side by side, ordering takeout, arguing about load-bearing walls and aesthetic choices, Grace had never been happier or more exhausted. One evening, as they reviewed plans spread across her desk, Julian set down his coffee and said quietly, "You know, people are starting to talk." Grace looked up. "About us?" "Rachel asked me today if there was anything going on between us. She was diplomatic about it, but the question was clear." "What did you tell her?" "The truth. That I am completely in love with you and have been since you crashed into me at that wedding." Grace felt warmth spread through her chest. "And what did she say?" "She said she already knew." "Apparently we are not as subtle as we thought." Grace laughed softly. So much for professional boundaries. Julian reached across the desk, taking her hand. "Grace, I do not want to hide this anymore. I do not want to pretend you are just a colleague when you are so much more. My career will be fine. Better than fine. You are brilliant, and everyone knows it. Being with me does not diminish that." She wanted to believe him, but doubt lingered. What about the people who will say, I only got this opportunity because of you? That my work only succeeded because a billionaire boyfriend funded it? Then we prove them wrong, Julian said simply. We show them that your talent speaks for itself. Grace, I believe in you. Not because I love you, but because you are genuinely exceptional at what you do. His words settled something restless in her heart. Maybe he was right. Maybe she had been so focused on protecting her career that she had forgotten to actually live her life. Okay, she said finally. No more hiding. Julian's smile was brilliant. He stood, walked around the desk, and pulled her into his arms. In the quiet office, with building plans surrounding them and the city lights glowing through the windows, he kissed her like she was precious and rare. The redesign presentation to the city council was scheduled for a Thursday morning. Grace spent the previous night rehearsing, adjusting slides, and fighting off panic. Julian wanted to attend, but Grace asked him to stay away. She needed to do this on her own terms to prove that her work stood independent of his influence. The council chambers were intimidating. 20 stern faces watched as Grace set up her presentation. Councilman Davis, the one who had initially opposed the project, sat in the center with his arms crossed and his expression skeptical. Grace took a deep breath and began. She walked them through every aspect of the redesign. How the building would serve multiple community needs, how the affordable housing units were designed with the same care and quality as the premium spaces, how green technology would reduce environmental impact, how local businesses would benefit from the retail spaces. She showed them renderings that brought her vision to life. Not just a building, but a community hub, a place where people from different economic backgrounds would share elevators and common spaces, breaking down the invisible walls that often divided cities. When she finished, the room was silent. Councilman Davis leaned forward, studying the plans projected on the screen. Miss Mitchell, this is not what I expected. Grace met his eyes steadily. With respect, Councilman, I think that is the point. You challenged us to think beyond profit margins and see the human impact. This design does that. It creates something meaningful. Davis nodded slowly, then looked at his fellow council members. I move to approve the revised project plan. The vote was unanimous. Grace walked out of the chambers feeling lighter than air. Her phone buzzed immediately. Julian's message read simply, "How did it go?" She called him instead of texting. "We got approved. Full unanimous vote." His whoop of joy made her laugh. "I am so proud of you. This calls for celebration." That evening, Julian took her to the rooftop restaurant where they had their first real date. But this time felt different. Everything felt different now that they had stopped hiding. Over dinner, Julian pulled out a small box. Grace's heart stuttered. "Before you panic," he said with a smile, "this is not what you think it is." "Not yet, anyway." He opened the box to reveal a delicate silver bracelet with a small architectural charm dangling from it. Grace recognized it immediately as a miniature version of her building design. "I had it commissioned," Julian explained, "to commemorate this moment. Your moment. Grace, what you did today had nothing to do with me or my money. That was pure talent and determination." Tears pricked her eyes as he fastened the bracelet around her wrist. "Thank you for believing in me even when I doubted myself. Always," he promised. Construction resumed with the new design. Grace spent months overseeing every detail, ensuring her vision translated perfectly into reality. Julian remained involved as an investor, but he made certain everyone understood that design decisions belonged to Grace alone. The project attracted media attention. Architecture magazines featured articles about the innovative mixed-use design. News outlets covered the affordable housing component. Grace gave interviews, her confidence growing with each one, but not everyone was supportive. A profile in a business magazine included a paragraph questioning whether Grace's rapid success had more to do with her relationship with Julian Montgomery than her actual skills. The insinuation stung, even though Grace knew it was baseless. She was reading the article for the third time, her anger building, when Julian found her in her office. "Do not give them power over you," he said gently, taking the magazine from her hands. "They are saying I slept my way to success. They are jealous. People who cannot fathom that someone could be both talented and in love." Grace, your building speaks for itself. Anyone who actually looks at your work knows the truth. But what if people always wonder? What if every success I have gets attributed to you? Julian was quiet for a moment, then said something that surprised her. "Then maybe I should step back." "What?" "From the project, from the public partnership. I can restructure my firm's involvement so it is less visible. You can take full credit for everything, which you deserve anyway." Grace stared at him. "You would do that?" "In a heartbeat." "Grace, your success matters more to me than any recognition or profit. If my presence hurts your career, I will remove myself." In that moment, Grace realized the depth of his love. He was willing to diminish his own role to protect her reputation. It was the most selfless thing anyone had ever offered her. "No," she said firmly. "I appreciate the offer, but no, we do not hide. We do not diminish our connection to appease people who do not matter. You believed in this project when others did not. You restructured your entire investment model to make the affordable housing work. You deserve credit for that." Julian smiled softly. "So what do? We keep building. Together." The building's completion took 14 months from the redesign approval. Grace was on site almost daily, watching her vision take physical form. The structure rose from the ground like something alive, each floor adding to its character and purpose. Julian visited often, though he maintained appropriate professional distance in front of the construction crews. But Grace would catch him watching her sometimes, pride evident in his expression. The grand opening was scheduled for a warm September evening. City officials, investors, future tenants, and media representatives filled the ground floor atrium. Grace wore a midnight blue dress that Julian had said made her look like starlight, and she felt both terrified and exhilarated. Thomas gave the opening remarks, praising the team's dedication and innovation. Then he introduced Grace as the visionary architect who had made it all possible. Grace stepped to the podium, looking out at the crowd. She saw Rachel smiling supportively. She saw Councilman Davis, who had become an unexpected ally, and she saw Julian, standing at the back, his eyes locked on her with absolute devotion. She spoke about her vision for buildings that served humanity rather than just occupying space. She talked about the importance of creating communities that brought people together across economic divides. She acknowledged the team who had worked tirelessly to make it real. And then she did something unexpected. "I also want to acknowledge Julian Montgomery," she said, her voice steady. "His firm invested in this project when others hesitated. More importantly, he believed in a vision that prioritized people over profit. He restructured traditional investment models to make affordable housing viable, and he challenged me to think bigger than I had imagined possible." Their eyes met across the room. Grace saw emotion flicker across Julian's face. "Some people have suggested that my success is connected to my relationship with Julian," she continued. "They are right, but not in the way they think. My success is connected to having someone who believes in my abilities, challenges me to exceed my own expectations, and supports my dreams without trying to control them. I am proud of this building, and I am proud to love someone who makes me better." The room erupted in applause. Grace stepped away from the podium, her heart pounding. Julian moved through the crowd, and when he reached her, he pulled her into his arms right there in front of everyone. "That was incredibly brave," he murmured against her hair. "I learned from the best." They gave tours of the building, showing off the retail spaces that would house local businesses, the affordable housing units designed with care and dignity, and the premium office spaces with stunning city views. Grace watched people's reactions, seeing her vision validated in their impressed expressions. Later, as the event wound down, Julian took her hand and led her to the rooftop terrace. The city spread out below them, lights twinkling like earthbound stars. The building hummed with life beneath their feet. "I have something to ask you," Julian said, turning to face her. Grace's pulse quickened. She saw him reach into his jacket pocket and pull out a small velvet box. "Grace Mitchell, you crashed into my life completely unexpectedly. You challenged me, inspired me, and showed me what it means to create something meaningful. You made me believe in more than just profit margins and returns on investment." He opened the box, revealing a stunning ring that caught the light. "I love you more than I thought possible to love anyone. Will you marry me?" Grace felt tears spill over as she nodded. "Yes. Absolutely yes." Julian slipped the ring onto her finger, then kissed her as the city lights glowed around them. When they finally pulled apart, Grace laughed through her happy tears. "You know people are going to say I married you for your money." "Let them talk," Julian said, smiling. "We know the truth. This is about love, partnership, and building something beautiful together." Grace looked at the ring on her finger, then at the man who had changed her life, then down at the building they had created together. Sometimes the best things in life came from unexpected collisions, from taking risks, and from believing that love and ambition could coexist. 2 years later, Grace stood on another construction site, this time for an entire affordable housing community she had designed. Julian stood beside her, their wedding bands catching the afternoon sun. In her other arm, she held their 6-month-old daughter, who grabbed at the building plans with tiny, curious fingers. "She is going to be an architect," Julian said, watching his daughter with amusement. "Or a contractor like your father," Grace countered. "Either way, she will build beautiful things, just like her mother." Grace leaned into him, feeling complete in a way she had never imagined possible. Her career flourished, her designs winning awards and recognition. Her marriage deepened with every shared challenge and triumph. And her purpose became clear through creating spaces that improved people's lives. The building where they had first worked together stood completed in the city skyline, a testament to what happened when talent met opportunity, when love supported ambition, and when two people decided that some complications were worth embracing. Grace Mitchell had crashed into Julian Montgomery's life one chaotic wedding day. And together they had built something far more valuable than any structure could contain. They had built a life filled with purpose, passion, and the kind of love that made everything else worthwhile. As the sun set over the construction site, painting the sky in shades of gold and rose, Grace kissed her daughter's forehead and squeezed Julian's hand. Some collisions changed everything, and she would forever be grateful for the one that had changed her entire world.